How's it going, guys? My name's Cody, and we'll be painting up the Jailor zombie from the Notorious Plagued Characters expansion for Zombicide Black Plague. Hope you guys enjoy it. To start things off, I primed up this zombie in Dead Flesh from Army Painter, but you could really use any color you happen to have because there really isn't a ton of zombie flesh on this model. I just used what was laying around from previous zombie paint jobs, and looking back at it now, a dark primer probably would have been better. So if you use black or white, you would just need to base coat the face in a Dead Flesh color. The first color I'm using here is Khaki from Vallejo Game Color. I'm painting the pants and the undershirt first because I like to paint from the inside out. I find I make less mistakes, and the mistakes I do make are a lot easier to fix. Moving on to the chest piece, I'm using Heavy Sienna, again from Vallejo Game Color. We don't have to worry about being overly neat here because any mistake, it's not really a mistake because we'll just be able to paint over it later. You don't know it now, but I'm gonna end up painting the arms in this color, and I totally didn't mean to do that. But again, it just shows you that it doesn't matter to be overly neat at this step. It's easily fixable. And here we are with that chest piece completely base coated. I noticed like up by his shoulder that must have rubbed off part of the paint there. I don't know if that was because of some dust that got stuck before I painted it. I ended up painting over it later. I don't think I have it on camera, but I do cover it up eventually. And now we're moving on to the belt. I used Charred Brown. It's probably one of my favorite browns from the Game Color range. Probably took about 2 coats to cover nicely, but it's really nice, deep, rich brown color. So instead of giving up 3 paints in, I'm gonna repaint the arms with Terracotta, and you'll see it's a nice bricky red color. And painting the hood, the gloves, and the boots, we're using Heavy Charcoal, which has really been my go-to black lately. It's more like a really dark gray, but with a slight tinge of blue almost. It's just a really nice base coat for black. And with the black all finished, we're going to be moving on to the rope, which I base coat with Desert Yellow. And going back to that idea of painting from the inside out, had I painted the rope first, I would need a really fine brush to get into that boot area there. And onto the mouth. I wanted to try a few colors from the Nocturna Fantasy Pro Crimson Red set from Vallejo that I picked up not too long ago. I'm using the color Crimson here, but pick your favorite red and don't worry about it. I just wanted to smash the inside of the mouth with some color and not worrying too much about coverage or anything because I knew I would be filling it up with blood later. And now I'm going to be base coating the future metallic parts with Heavy Charcoal. Black is a nice base coat for metallics, and it's also cleaning up the brown that I slopped on earlier. You can see that I'm using the side of my brush to prevent hitting the surface below it. It really helps with control when you're doing things like this. And for my final base coat, I'm using Model Air Gunmetal, and just like the previous step, use the side of your brush to keep it nice and neat. One thing to note about metallics is to use a separate brush and water than your normal colors to prevent metallic flakes from getting into your paints or gunking up your brush. Full disclosure, I admit to being lazy about using separate water with metallics at times, so be better than me. And moving on to washes, I'm using Nuln Oil from Citadel, but you could use any black wash for this purpose. I'm just using it to get in all the nooks and crannies. It'll bring out some details, and it'll help bring out highlights later. And for the rest of the model, I'm going to be using Agrax Earthshade. The biggest thing with this is just slap it on there and just try to keep it away from the flat surfaces and let the wash do all the work. It gets in all those cracks and details and makes everything pop. Makes it look great, and you could stop there if you wanted to, but we want to bring this up a notch with some highlights, and we'll be doing that next. So my first highlight, I'm going to be using a 50-50 mix of Heavy Sienna and Heavy Skintone. I made a bit of a mistake here by not thinning these down enough, and it really makes the highlights pop out more than I would have liked, but I'll show you how to fix it if something like this happens to you. With highlights, you want to pull the paint from the shadows and onto the raised areas of the model. If your paints are thinned properly, you'll get a nice transition between the colors and you won't have to pull it back like I do later. One thing that with what a wash helps you with is you can kind of see on his back here, you can kind of see where there's shadows, and it just kind of helps you see where you need to put that highlight. And with the previous highlight finished, we're moving on to just using a straight heavy skin tone, and I'm just using that to hit the most raised areas of this model, right on top of the leg there where I think the light's going to be hitting. Right on top of the back, maybe just a little bit there. Yeah, and right on the top of the shoulders there. And highlighting the belt, I'm using a 50-50 mix of leather brown and charred brown. Probably starting to see a theme here where I mix the previous color with the next layer highlight. And there it is complete, and then you'll see me go in with leather brown to brighten it up even more. Just hitting those most raised areas. So to pull back the highlights that I felt were a little too bright, I'm using a 4-to-1 mix of glazed medium to heavy sienna, and you can tell that by using the base color, it basically just tints the surface much like a wash would, but it's by using that base color, it's tying all of those highlights together, and it just makes it blend a little nicer. And with the arms, I'm using a 50-50 mix of Terracotta and Sanctuary Red, which is really a nice red from the Nocturna Fantasy Pro line. Like I said, I got these paints not too long ago, and I'm really happy with the results I've gotten with them so far. Again, just pull up from the shadows, hit the tops of the model. You don't see me painting under the arms at all. I'm just kind of mostly focusing on the top. And that final highlight of just using Sanctuary Red, just hitting the most raised areas and wherever I think the light's going to hit. And it just makes a nice highlight. It looks really bright right now, but it tones down as it dries. And on to highlighting the black, I'm using a 50-50 mix of Heavy Charcoal and Sombre Grey. And just like the brown, I probably go a little too thick, but I'll fix it up at the end. That's probably something I want to stress on my channel, is that 1, I'm not an expert, and 2, mistakes will happen, and as long as you know how to fix them, you'll still end up with a good looking mini. And for my final highlight with the black, all I do is add a drop of wolf gray into the mix and just hit most of the edges where I think light's gonna hit. And just using the side of my brush here to hit the little stitching on the hood. And hitting the gloves just a little bit. You don't want to go too crazy with this color. And the last part of this model that I'm going to be highlighting is the rope. I'm using a 50-50 mix of desert yellow and bone white, and just hitting all those most raised surfaces again. And this is really going to make the rope look a little more realistic. And for my final highlight on the rope, I'm using just straight bone white, and then once I finish up with this, I'm going to be hitting the teeth and dotting the eyes, and we'll call this color done. So here I am getting those teeth. I hit the tongue there, but I'll be covering it up in the next step with a different color, but not too worried about neatness because I know I'm going to be covering it up with blood later. Just using the side here, use your finest brush here to hit the eyes, and you'll end up with something that looks like that. And I'm just hitting the tongue with some reddish flesh to cover up that little white dot I hit there earlier. And I guess I lied when I said we were on the final highlight with the rope, but I'm just hitting all the metallics with silver from Vallejo Model Air. Just final little details I'm hitting here, and hitting the little torture device he's got right there. And with that, the model is done with the exception of the base, and I'm using Stonewall Gray here just to cover it all up. It's just going to be a good base color for doing some stonework later on. To simulate stonework, I'm just freehanding some lines using cold gray and making the stones different sizes. It's probably best if they're not completely straight. It's just to keep them a little more realistic here. To fill in the stones, here I'm using Khaki again. You can use any earthy brown color you happen to have. And just make sure you don't put the same color next to each other. Here's I'm using bone white. And then for my final color for stones, I'm using base flesh. And you can leave some of the gray behind if you want. And to finish this base off, we're just going to be using Agrax Earthshade to wash over it. It just makes everything look like it's been traveled over and old, and it looks good on the tabletop. And we're just cleaning up the edge with using Charred Brown, and just got a few more touches to go and we're all done. Before we move on to the blood, the first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you varnish the model. You could use matte or satin. I wouldn't do gloss because we're going to be doing blood and you kind of want it to look like it's still glistening and fresh. And for the blood, I use a custom mix of Tamiya Clear Red, some Gory Red, and Heavy Charcoal. You don't want to use a lot of Heavy Charcoal, otherwise it'll look a little too black. You just want a tiny little dot, or if you want a little bit more, it's up to you. But just do what looks right to you. You could add purple, you could add blue, you don't want straight red. I just feel like that doesn't look as realistic as actual blood. So here's the final model. One thing I didn't capture on video was I wasn't too happy with how the hood, boots, and gloves looked because the highlights were just a little too extreme. So all I did was went in with some Null Oil from Citadel, and that toned down the highlights a bit. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video, and I hope you found some of the things in here that were useful. If you'd like to see me paint more zombies from this particular box, or any other zombie for that matter, let me know in the comments below. Also, if you could help me out, hit that subscribe and like button. It would go a long way to help me grow this channel. You can find all my socials down below, where you can stay up to date on all my projects. Until next time, thanks again.